travel isn't just about destinations, it's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabocha, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024. Good evening. Welcome to the program. I'm Stephen Grootes. There are plenty of stories we'll touch on in the next few moments, some of them vitally important, including, I think, our conversation with the Health Funders Association. They're furious at these findings by the Council for Medical Schemes that some of the big medical aids that you will know and have heard of and may well belong to are guilty of some form of racism, I suppose, in terms of paying out patients who had treatment from black healthcare providers, doctors, nurses, whatever. And we'll get to that in a moment. We'll talk about Trump and tariffs because that's also vitally important. But the story that stuck out for me, and you can reach around and if you're young enough, pat yourself on the back, is that we're all so keen to pay our taxes that the SARS website crashed today. Now, obviously, that's because some people expect a SARS payout. I wonder what that's like. But still, fascinating to see that so many people are keen to sort it all out, get the situation going, that actually the website crashed. And I've made this point before. I suspect that we're about to have a lot more discussions about SARS, be talking a lot more about SARS over the next couple of months. And let me just explain why I say this. The first is that there's been quite a big promise made by the Commissioner, Edward Kieswetter, that he can get a lot more money in. And by the way, he started saying, I think about 2 years ago, that in fact he thought around a third of the economy was sort of untaxed. So he thought there was a lot of money out there that was owed. So fine, good. So the first thing that's going to happen is we're going to say, are you getting that money in? And if he falls short, and obviously he's not going to get it all in the first year, can you imagine? These are people and businesses and illicit enterprises, criminal networks, whatever you want to call them, that have been going for years and years and years, untaxed, not all going to happen at once. So there's that point. But the second is that the disputes, the number of disputes around SARS and involving SARS are simply going to rise. To put it another way, if you had to ask me, what should you do if you're in a dispute with SARS? I would say, how much stomach do you have for a fight? Because I think they're keen to find the cash, more keen than perhaps they've been in just a little while. So I was strangely encouraged to see that the SARS website crashed today. I mean, somewhere there's an IT guy shouting at an IT guy, shouting at an IT guy. But what it does mean is that people are willing to interact with it and get on with it and sort it out one way or another, whether you're expecting a refund or whether you just want to know what you owe. It's one of the great miracles of South Africa is that when SARS works, things are a lot better for all of us. I don't think I've ever spoken to, on the radio, an auctioneer, never mind an art auctioneer. We'll be speaking to Susie Goodman later on the program, Executive Director of Strauss & Co. She studied art history and then translated that into becoming an art auctioneer. I wonder if she knew that when she started her first year, that's what would happen. Very interesting journey. 011 883 0702 021 4460567 and voice notes this evening on 072 702 1702. Lots going on, watching the White House very closely tonight.
The Money Show
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV Channel 856.
The announcement of a finding today by the independent panel commissioned by the Council for Medical Schemes that medical aids, you'll have heard of many of them, the Government Employee Medical Scheme, Med Scheme, Discovery, racially discriminated against black doctors and black healthcare providers. The panel, which was chaired by the advocate Tembeke Ngcukaitobi, finding that claims submitted by patients who had black doctors or black health workers had a much higher chance of being investigated as compared to patients with white doctors and white healthcare workers. As a result, it seems that many black healthcare workers or patients had to wait longer for their payments or were not properly paid out at all. There's some very interesting examples. According to the findings, Med Scheme was 6 times more likely to investigate a claim from a black anaesthetist than a white one. Black dental therapists were 3 times more likely to be investigated. There's a long list of this. Fridjhon Naidu is the CEO of the Health Funders Association. Fridjhon, good evening. As I understand it, you reject the findings of this report. On what basis do you reject them?
Thanks, Stephen. So we're still actually studying the report. It was just released today, so we're still going through it. I think, firstly, on a basis that we note that the final report, has been presented as including findings of systemic unfair discrimination of profiling, but it's actually not the case. The report, when you read it, explicitly states that it does not make a legal finding of unfair discrimination. And also, it does not make any finding regarding racial profiling. And we note that the interim report noted there was no explicit evidence of profiling. So the one concern, and we've raised it throughout, is, where, for example, some of the conclusions have been drawn. They're based on a model, a statistical model, which is flawed because when we looked at it at a very high level, the analysis was looking at surnames and classifying them according to race. Now, that was not peer-reviewed by anybody, and there was significant amounts of experts' opinion, independent expert opinion, which said, that methodology is flawed. So we're a little bit baffled, if you can say, that the panel is actually placing reliance on a flawed methodology and then making conclusions from that perspective. So I think, we're still studying the report in full, though.
Okay, I can completely understand that to say to somebody, this is your surname and therefore you must be of this race or ethnic group is problematic. Obviously. But in terms of big numbers, when you're looking at large numbers of people, I think in some ways it would be seen as common sense. We kind of know which groups tend to have which surnames. And the risk of your argument would be that you're using a technical reason to try and avoid a finding that involves race against your members.
No, not at all. And remember, I think it's not me that's actually said that. This is several independent experts, credible independent experts have come forward and actually said this is inaccurate. So on that basis, you can't place reliance on a flawed methodology. Sure, for example, you've got regions in various places that, let's say KZN, which I think was raised today, there are probably more Indian doctors there and Indian providers. So you'll see a higher likelihood of investigations or, of that nature. But, we still go to the fact that the methodology that's been, and even though we provided evidence, and resource, the panel only relied on one single expert, which is flawed.
Okay. Do you believe then that there's no problem relating to race in medical aid claims?
I do not believe that there's racial profiling. And in fact, the report actually says so, that there isn't the case. And in fact, it went further to say, they didn't find any cases and weren't called on to find any case of discrimination. In fact, they said, each case should come on its own case by basis to look at whether there was discrimination, but there wasn't.
Okay, so you can say that about anything, that you need to go on a case-by-case basis, and in terms of finding justice for individuals, that's obviously what you have to do. Mm-hmm. I accept that. But there's also, and this has been seen in other places, and I'm sure at some point there'll be findings here, there is also a thing such as institutionalized prejudice or institutionalized discrimination. The same report that you point to also seems to say that, for example, MedScheme was 6 times more likely to investigate a claim from a black anaesthetist than a white one. Now, okay, you can use the surname argument there, but do you have any other explanation for why this would be the case?
Sure. So I think, it's also important. Why were those just specifically selected, those particular ones? And I think this really does go to, if you look at various other ones, they're very much in line from what we understand. But, those ones have been selected for whatever reason, as cases to be made. But it's not the, in fact, situation across the board.
But, doesn't that still mean that black anaesthetists are being discriminated against. It would certainly seem so, on the prima facie level at this point, on face value, it would seem that there does seem to be some kind of problem in the medical aid industry.
No. So I think let's take a step back, actually. Maybe let's look at this, right? 90% of providers, over 90% of providers are paid without any issue. Less than 10% of providers are flagged, right? And we're talking about medical schemes works on a trust basis here. Once you presented with the invoice, within 30 days, you are automatically paid. It's only 10% of providers that are flagged, and then there's a wide spectrum of that 10%. So it's fraud, waste, and abuse. So some are, intentional fraud, which is a small percentage, and some are actually, a majority are actually billing errors. So when we talk about billing errors, we're talking about, for example, billing for 10 liters of oxygen, which could have been a typo when it's supposed to be billed for 1 liter. Now that's an error, so that's flagged, right? And that's not necessarily a provider. It's been reflected on the analytics. There's no race implicated in it. And then of course, there's other ones, which is, providers are flagged for at a pharmacy for dispensing medicine when they're actually taking nappies. So those are intentional, fraud. So we're talking about a small minority of providers here, who are actually found as part of the fraud, waste, and abuse perspective. So it's not a majority of the issue here.
Okay. So just to be clear, Fridjhon, you believe then that a patient treated by Dr. Naidu and a patient treated by Dr. Grootes, their claims will be treated in exactly the same way by medical aids?
Yes. Fairly and without discrimination.
Fridjhon Naidu, thanks very much indeed. CEO of the Health Funders Association.
702. Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
Well, the U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent confirming this afternoon that while the Trump administration will be sending letters to various countries informing them about the tariffs they'll face, those letters will still point out that there is still room for negotiation. The U.S. President Donald Trump saying over the weekend, countries that are part of or align with BRICS will face an additional 10% tariff. In other words, we would expect to pay 10% more than whatever it is that we were going to pay as a result of our membership of BRICS. And in fact, the President Cyril Ramaphosa in Brazil wrapping up his meeting with members of BRICS this afternoon. Yash Ramkolowan is the Managing Director and Economist at DNA Economics. Yash, good evening to you. I do appreciate the time. I find myself once again in the position of wondering, how seriously can we take a Trump threat? Is it going to happen this time? Is he going to chicken out? Or are we just going to be in this unpredictable position for the next 3 years?
Good evening, Stephen, and good evening to the listeners. It's a valid question. Are we going to see another taco trade in place? Very hard to say. I think if we step back and look at where we currently are, we know that South Africa faces the universal 10% tariff on most of its products, although there are a broad range of products exclusions. There are the steel and aluminium additional duties of around 50%, and then the additional duties on vehicles at 25%. So despite the fact that the direct or bilateral tariff on South Africa has been suspended until possibly the end of Wednesday, early Thursday, we still face a range of additional duties. And very hard to say, I think, the extent to which we will see the imposition of the additional 30% that was originally in place in April. So, yes, lots of questions, I think, for everyone.
and I suspect for a while to come. If we do get the original tariffs he wanted to impose, or kind of a bit plus 10%. At some point, it must end our traditional trading relationship with the US. I realize there are exceptions, and let's just put those to one side for a moment. But, if we start looking at tariffs on a permanent basis of 25% or more, let's say 30% or more, isn't that pretty much the end of our goods into the US? It would just be too expensive in that market.
So yes and no. I think the products exclusions are actually quite important because if you look at South Africa's trade profile with the US, we can, at the risk of generalizing, probably categorize it into three broad categories. The first being South Africa's exports of primary commodities, a large proportion of which are actually included in the list of excluded products, those products that don't face additional duties. And I think that's quite important to note because on the Trump administration side, their big focus has been on reindustrialization and improving the manufacturing base in the U.S. And if you look at or a large proportion of South Africa's exports to the U.S., it is actually intermediate goods which feed into the manufacturing process. So even if we do get a big increase in import duties targeting South Africa, I think the products exclusions would be very important to consider. Having said that, yes, there are a large number of other products which are not included in the exclusion list, which would face very significant consequences. And the U.S. consumer facing an additional 40 or 50% duty on products such as citrus, blueberries, vehicles, which count amongst the largest imports of, I guess, finished goods or consumer goods from South Africa. That would be very detrimental to South African exporters and probably effectively close off the market for South African exporters.
The list of exclusions, which I suppose another way of looking at it is saying these are the levers we could use, right? And I remember at the time, I think a lot of people sort of laughed in response when Gwede Mantashe, the Minister of Mineral and Petroleum Resources, said we should just say we're not going to sell certain things to the US. But I do wonder more and more if actually platinum is the lever to say we're not going to sell you this stuff and good luck getting it from Russia.
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of the products that have been included in the products exclusion list are what have been termed critical minerals, although the exact definition of this varies across different countries and different classifications. But I think that is potentially one area of leverage for South Africa, and in terms of the bilateral trade talks that might be taking place and the list of offers that could be made by South Africa to the U.S. We currently do have an export tax on a small number of products. One of the options might be to raise the export tax on a broader range of mineral exports to the U.S., although, again, if you look at how the U.S. has reacted to China's imposition of additional duties, they've ended up just raising duties. So it does risk a further trade war, if you want to call it that, between South Africa and the U.S., although having said that is probably one of the core areas where South Africa has strong leverage compared to any of the other areas where we might be negotiating.
It's fascinating. From what I can see, we've been playing for time, and I'm sure there's a long list of countries playing for time, saying let's negotiate this seriously, but let's do it over time. Do you think that the Trump administration is going to grant that? Again, an impossible question, Yash, but actually the US probably doesn't have much of a choice because it surely can't negotiate with the entire world in sort of 210 or whatever different negotiations at once.
Yeah, so Stephen, I mean, if you look at trade agreements in history, these typically take anything between 2 and 10 years to negotiate. So trying to negotiate, I think somebody from the administration, the U.S. administration, had said they are going to negotiate 90 deals in 90 days. Highly improbable. If you look at the countries that originally were targeted, it was about 50 plus countries targeted with the additional duties on Liberation Day in April. Out of those 50 countries, to date, we've heard of only one. I think it is Vietnam, where they've agreed some sort of agreement, but it's not clear exactly what. And then one country which wasn't even targeted has reached some sort of framework agreement, but again, not clear exactly what the detail of that is, being the United Kingdom. So I think the reality is that there will be some extension. Even in yesterday's press briefing, it wasn't very clear from President Trump whether or not it was going to be imposed this week or whether or not the secretary was actually correct in suggesting that it would be imposed in 1st of August. So I expect there will be some delayed reaction to the imposition of the tariffs, and hopefully it'll just be a continuous delay.
You and the rest of the world will all be holding thumbs together. Yash, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. Yash Ramkolowan is the Managing Director, Economist at DNA Economics.
The Money Show.
The Markets.
Siboniso
Ngomalo is Chief Investment Officer at the Old Mutual Investment Group. Siboniso, good evening. Holding thumbs along with the rest of the world? I mean, it's a terrible investment strategy, but maybe all we have.
Good evening, Stephen, and good evening to your listeners. Stephen, one of the things we like to say is investing with perspective. And with all of this noise, I just wanted to take a step back. Half the year has been, and let us look at perspective, which then will explain where we think the world is going. One of the things that is true is that if you look at being a South African investor has proven to be extremely profitable in the first half of this year. If you had invested in South Africa, in the all-share index, this year for 6 months to date, you are up close to 30%, 29.2%. If you had invested in the S&P 500 in the US with those big tech companies and all of those companies, you'd be up 5.5%. And if you'd invested in emerging markets, you'd also be up just about 5.6%. And so, therefore, with all of this noise that's going on, being invested in South Africa, given what's happened in our commodities, because we're a commodity-producing nation, especially in the PGM sector, has proven to be highly profitable. And so, Stephen, if I continue and I say, actually, what drove this? One of the big things that happened in the first half was the US dollar fell over 11%. Now, this doesn't look like a big move, but it's actually the biggest move, the worst start to a year in the US dollar in 50 years. And so why is the US dollar under pressure? Well, the US has got a lot of debt. In fact, they've got the same amount of debt they last had back after World War II. They've got about 37 trillion in debt. Now, a third of that, about 9.2 trillion, is going to be refinanced this year in 2025. Now, the sticky part of that is that interest rates are high. They've gone higher. The last time when they were raising this debt, interest rates were close to zero. And so therefore, if you take tariffs, if you take high indebtedness in the US and the fact that it needs to be refinanced and a weaker dollar, the US is under immense pressure. There's a devaluation of income and purchasing power. And so therefore, hence, Trump has to try and raise revenues by imposing these tariffs because their own financial situation is not good.
Sure. There's a lot going on there. I mean, platinum group metals have been suddenly almost out of nowhere, but not really out of nowhere, suddenly done very well over the last 5 weeks. And now consistently, I mean, the World Platinum Investment Council saying they expect prices to stay high for quite some time. You'd sort of expect them to say that, but it's a very rational thing to say.
Yes, it is. I mean, all commodities, as the dollar weakens, commodity prices, because they're traded in commodities, tend to go up. So that is good for commodities. So we want a weaker dollar. That's why when we see a strong rand, that tends to be good for our commodities. But if we talk about the platinum group metals, platinum itself is up 50% this year. Palladium is up about 20%. Why are they going up? Well, basically, platinum group metals are used in what's called autocatalytic converters, which go in cars to obviously clean out the fumes that come out of the back of a car. And so therefore, what's happened globally is that EVs or electric vehicles, that penetration has tapered off. So that's starting to come off. It's not proving to be as sustained. But the platinum companies are not investing in new production. And so therefore, you've got the demand of internal combustion engines that is continuing to grow, whereas the supply of platinum that you need to obviously manage the emissions, that is coming off, which means then prices have to adjust. This is economics 101. Now, Stephen, what's really good about this is that South Africa produces 70% of PGM, of platinum group metals. And the last time we saw a sharp rise in platinum group metals, because we produce 70% of them, then they pay taxes in South Africa. So if you go back to 2022, we saw the fiscus, corporate taxes, I think, rose about 100 billion rand because of the taxes that came from the platinum group metals. So if platinum group metals keep going up, it's good for South Africa's budget, and it's good for our stock exchange. Maybe it's a good time to invest in South Africa.
Sibonisa Ngomalo, thanks so much. Chief Investment Officer at the Old Mutual Investment Group.
Travel isn't just about destinations. It's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabotja, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place, whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The Money Show.
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
And DSTV channel 856.
Well, I was watching President Cyril Ramaphosa just briefly sort of wrapping up the BRICS summit in Brazil, and he's been there for much of the weekend, and just thinking sort of idly about BRICS and trade. And it's worth just repeating a comment that's been made many times, which is BRICS is not yet a sort of trading bloc. And actually, how difficult it will be to make BRICS a trading bloc. Now, we do a lot of trade with China, obviously, and we do a lot of trade with Brazil, and you'll hear more about that in a moment. We don't do that much trade with Russia. I know there's been a lot of discussion about our relationship with Russia, but we don't do that much trade with Russia. India's interesting because on some level, we have such a shared history with India. We have shared cultural links. We have shared sporting links. I mean, there are millions of people in India who watch more South African cricket than South Africans do for various reasons. I'm really not making that up, by the way. It's true. And look at the SA20, the cricket tournament that's played here, that involves Indian franchises. I mean, the links are very, very strong. The problem is that, for example, if you were our farmers, you'd be thinking, oh, well, let's sell oranges to India. Let's sell this to India. But I can't see any country in the world that'll get around the political constituency that is farmers in India. They are immensely strong, and they will not allow you to trade very easily there. There will be tariffs, and I mean tariffs of, 50% kind of tariffs. So I do wonder at some point if someone somewhere can sit down and do some more deeper thinking about the trade that we are doing with BRICS countries and the trade that we can do with BRICS countries. I think some of it's obvious. Some of it's a little bit more complicated. On one level, I know that people who support BRICS will be thinking this is the moment, as the US seems almost determined to disengage from the global economy. What did Gulam Balam call it? A sort of Brexit from the global economy. All of that said, it's a lot harder said than done, and maybe we'll have to come to terms with that. 011 8830702 021 446 0567.
702. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
We're talking about Brazil. You'll be able to buy Brazilian chicken products again. Our agricultural department seems to have now lifted a ban on all chicken meat imports from that country following bird flu being found in the state of Rio Grande do Sul. Currently, Brazilian chicken is seen as a vital ingredient in a whole range of products that you can buy, including mechanically deboned meat. Now, you might like your bologna. You don't necessarily want to watch it being made, but most of that would include chicken from Brazil. Imamaleng Motibi is the CEO of the Association of Meat Importers and Exporters. Imamaleng, good evening. Appreciate your time on The Money Show. Obviously, all of this vital for your industry and for your association. You must be breathing a sigh of relief.
We are elated, I must say, Stephen, and good evening to the listeners.
There's a much bigger issue here in all sorts of ways. So in the past, we've banned imports from an entire country. I mean, if a country has avian influenza, I can understand why. It's incredibly contagious. Now we seem to be going state by state. So if Brazil can show that it's controlled, that it's not spreading, we'll allow imports in. Is that an important shift, a significant shift?
Yeah, good evening, Stephen. As I indicated, we are very excited to have reached this milestone. Brazil was the only country standing in terms of avian influenza, as and when they announced the outbreak late April. In May, sorry. Until then, all other countries were coming in and out of avian influenza, including South Africa. So I think, as we can see, it is a global phenomenon. The key question is, how do we manage diseases within the meat trade sector? Because it looks like we are there.
What would have happened if the ban had stayed in place for much longer? I mean, presumably it would have pushed meat product prices in South Africa up dramatically, and maybe some products wouldn't have been available.
Definitely, Stephen. If you look at the mechanically deboned meat, monthly we import about 18,000 tons into South Africa. And all of that is for human consumption, for the processing of polonies, as you mentioned, the Viennas, Russians. And that is protein product that is mostly in the availability scope of the lower income consumers in South Africa. We also import roughly 4,000 tons of chicken feed, 1,500 tons of gizzards. So offal is a key component as well in terms of the products that we bring in from Brazil, because the local producers are not able to meet that demand. So it's not displacing the existing industry. It is complementing what the producers can provide based on the demand of the lower income consumers. We all know that the consumers are tight now in terms of affordability. Therefore, they've been moving from chicken portions to where we are now in terms of offal and products derived from mechanically deboned meat. So this is a key market for South Africa because it's the largest producer of these products we're speaking to globally.
I mean, and also pilchards, people have been looking at those too. I mean, Brazil, as you say, a massive supplier. In fact, I was told once that just one of their big farms matches our entire chicken output. I mean, that's astonishing. What happens to the global chicken industry if Brazil is cut out of it for some reason? I mean, that would lead to a massive shift around the world.
Actually, when the outbreak was declared in Brazil, it was a global panic throughout all markets. You should have seen, in essence, the queues of people that were countries that were going through Brazil in terms of going into negotiations on how to get around the disease management programs, because in essence, because this had never happened in Brazil and in many other countries before it happened, countries used to have certain regimes in terms of protocols that never anticipated the development of outbreak of diseases as part of what needs to be considered in trade. So as and when these eventualities happen, countries have then shifted to get into newer agreements that accommodate that. But because Brazil had never had that, many countries had actually still not gotten to a point of new arrangements that envisage the outcome of an avian influenza should it arrive at that point. So most countries were not ready.
Imamaleng, thanks so much. Imamaleng Motibe is the CEO of the Association of Meat Importers and Exporters. Do you want to know how your polony is made? Do you really?
Travel isn't just about destinations. It's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabotja, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place, whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024.
On the next Money Show, personal finance expert, co-founder of Galileo Capital, Warren Ingram, will talk about your mid-year financial health check. We are halfway through 2025. Yes, it is time to do a health check, reveal on your money to see how you've progressed and to figure out what you need to work on for the next 6 months. Dr. Rotendo Ndwingwi, founding director of Tribe Africa Advisory, author of the book Rumble in the Jungle Reloaded, has the latest business news from around our continent. Also, the latest on the top business news from around the world.
The Money Show on 702.
Monday to Friday, 6 to 8 p.m.
Looks like our wine industry may be yet another casualty of how you're feeling about our economy. A little bit of a lack of confidence, it seems, leading to a slight slowdown, maybe a bigger slowdown in sales. So wine sales are down. Bad news for wine farmers. Maybe pretty good news for you. Michael Fridjhon is founder of winewizard.co.za, visiting professor of wine business at the University of Cape Town and director at WineX. Michael, good evening. Good to chat again. How bad is this dip? What's happening to wine sales?
Listen, you can see the figures, and it's a fairly reliable report, the Vinimark market review. And it does show that there's a general decline, but there's a stodginess. And that stodginess is, I'm afraid, a reflection of our economy. I don't think it is all doom and gloom, but that's because I'm a perennial optimist. and because I see things which are available to South African producers, notwithstanding the threats on the horizon.
So domestically, is it just about consumer spending and how people are feeling about money, or is there some other shift? And we know younger people around the world are drinking less alcohol.
Look, I think there is that trend, but I have to say I'm not sure it's that evident in South Africa. If you look at the crowd we had at Standard Bank Winex last year, it was a very full hall for 3 days. It was a young crowd, it was a vibrant crowd, and it was a crowd keen to learn about wine. And that for me is one of the silver linings to this cloud. African continent as a whole is a new frontier, and the wine industries of the world have advanced from the 80s through till today by getting a new generation interested and involved with wine. So Margaret Thatcher created the yuppie generation. The yuppie generation bought wine instead of beer and spirits the way its parents did. Now Africa is that next frontier, and wine sales generally in Africa are more buoyant and are not being compromised in the same way as they are amongst the more mature markets and as they are amongst consumers such as Gen Z. So I do think that we have on our doorstep a new market ready to learn about wine and ready to imbibe. And what the industry has to learn to do is to communicate with that generation and to take advantage of the fact that they are there. We don't have to look as far afield as we did previously. We have to make more of our markets closer to home.
In normal times, the ups and downs of an economy, is there normally a correlation between how much wine is being brought and drunk and what kind of wine and sort of consumer spending? In other words, if you look at our economic numbers, are you surprised at all to see what you're seeing?
Not surprised at all. You know, everyone says when the economy's down, people drink more. If only that were true. They don't. If you don't have the money to spend, you are certainly not going to necessarily take it out in wine. One of the factors which may be skewing the figures, of course, is the size of the illicit market. And it's now estimated by the industry to be at least 40% total alcohol sales. The government does nothing to close down on the illicit traders, many of whom are obviously extremely well connected. So if you talk to the SARS guys, they will tell you they know how much money they're losing. So the volumes are going through. We're not being able to pick them up on the figures. But definitely, as a general rule, in times of recession, people spend less, which means they either buy less or buy cheaper.
This is probably an impossible question. Would illicit wine made legally, be cheaper only because it's not paying the excise tax and the other taxes? Or would it be cheaper because it's made in a different way too?
The answer to is both. So the really illicit alcohol market is product called ale, which is essentially a fermentation which doesn't require any fruit of any sort. You simply use sugar and yeast, colorant and flavorant. That, of course, is very cheap to produce. And in addition, of course, it doesn't pay VAT and it doesn't pay tax. Once wine has been produced, if somebody is clever enough, and it doesn't take a huge amount of skill in a situation as porous as ours, to move a whole bunch of that bulk to an illicit trader, and that trader is able to run a cash business that doesn't account itself to SARS, well then, of course, there's a massive saving in VAT and excise. And in the lower end of the wine market, that is a significant amount of money that can be saved. And it can go into papsucker, can go into returnable glass, or it can go into plastic, plastic being probably the packaging of choice for that market.
So with all of this happening at the moment, if you are a wine drinker, are there some bargains around that wouldn't normally be around, or perhaps more affordable than they are in normal times?
Absolutely, because cash flow is a problem. They've had a fabulous 2025 vintage, both good volumes and obviously fantastic quality. And producers have to clear the pipeline. In order to pay for packaging, you've got to get rid of whatever you have in your cellars. So for those with constrained cash flow, the only possibility is discounting. So consumers can look forward to better prices from people trying to clear past vintages to make way in their cellars for the great 2025s.
Michael Fridjhon, really appreciate the thoughts. Thanks so much. Visiting Professor of Wine Business at the University of Cape Town and founder of winewizard.co.za as well, and of course the person who formed WineX. But just interesting to see if this is the moment for someone to actually sort of develop the taste for it and then move into, the right kind of vintage. It is, as he said, a moment where there could be some bargains that are around. In a moment, looking forward to speaking to Faiz Siddiqui, the author of the book Hubris Maximus, The Shattering of Elon Musk. I was paging through it today. Some astonishing stories that come out of it. And the timing, of course, couldn't be better considering what Musk has been up to over the weekend. So looking forward to that in the next hour. Don't forget, we'll be talking to an auctioneer from 7:30 as well. Good evening, you with The Money Show. It's 7 o'clock.
The Money Show
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV channel 856.
So I was fascinated by a report today in News 24 around cell phone coverage. And you may sort of be frustrated about where you live and the cell phone coverage that you get. Did you know that just on Vodacom, there are 6.5 million devices that rely on 2G cell phone coverage? You know what 2G gets you? It gets you voice calls and SMSs. That's pretty much it. I mean, it's not even Edge, I think. It might be Edge. Do you remember Edge? I mean, I have very bad memories of Edge. You wouldn't even be able to sort of manage on WhatsApp on that. And you might say to yourself, are there really 6.5 million people that actually have cell phones that are only 2G? And I think the answer might be, well, yes. If you consider they're about $100, you use them as a spare, you use them as your sort of alarm, your FM radio, and to make calls if you need to, and it costs you virtually nothing. Or you just use it as a radio and make one phone call a month. And I can see the problem. Trying to switch that off, and people would want to switch them off, they want to use the spectrum for other things, higher value things, is actually quite difficult. I'm sure also there are sort of other devices that use SIM cards that are not cell phones. So just off the top of my head, and I'm kind of making this up, maybe the weather service uses them or something. But there'll be some sort of group of devices together that'll use 2G. And the moment someone says, we're going to switch them off tomorrow, you'll find out exactly how many people use 2G devices. It's a fascinating and interesting side of our country. But 6.5 million 2G devices still on Vodacom alone.
702 with Stephen Grootes.
Email him on stephen@702.co.za.
Well, a promise from the Finance Minister, Enoch Godongwana, to improve its oversight of the Public Investment Corporation. He's told an Action SA MP that this might include a restructuring of how it's managed. By convention, the chair of the PIC has been the Deputy Finance Minister, or a Deputy Finance Minister. Looks like that position will now be held by someone who's politically neutral, I presume, an investment expert. At the same time, the PIC is facing questions about its role in the Daybreak saga that saw that company being allowed to collapse. Sikanati Manchanja is a journalist with News 24 Investigations. Sikanati, good evening. Excuse me, I forgot. An award-winning journalist with News 24 Investigations. We all remember the Mpati inquiry. It made recommendations some time ago. Are we now finally going to see all of those being implemented?
Stephen, good afternoon. That's what politicians do when they get asked questions. They always make promises. But if you remember, the Mpati Commission gave those recommendations over 3 years ago. And to date, very little has changed in the governance of the Public Investment Corporation. Still, far too much power is vested in the politicians in the form of the finance minister.
I mean, the idea of removing the politician as chair, on the face of it, that would seem to be a good idea. From what you're saying, actually, there needs to be a lot of other changes.
Absolutely, that would only be a good start, but it is only that, a start. What does need to happen is one, for the Public Investment Corporation's board to be appointed not by the finance minister, as is currently the case, who then delegates his deputy to chair the board. All normal companies, in terms of the Companies Act, are governed by a board of directors that's elected by shareholders. Now, in the case of the Public Investment Corporation, the shareholders are the beneficiaries who are the civil servants, current and past, who benefit from the management of its funds. Those are the people that work for the state and for parastatal entities such as, for example, the Unemployment Insurance Fund and such other similar entities. They need to be able to elect the board, and the majority of the board, they are independent, non-executive directors, with the exception of the Chief Financial Officer or Finance Director and Chief Executive Officer, and of course, in the case of the PIC, the Chief Investment Officer. The rest of the people do need to be appointed by the people who shall carry the can for its decisions, good and bad.
There's another sort of philosophical question about the Public Investment Corporation. It's so big, it receives so much money to invest, that it could create almost not just new companies, but almost entire industries. And I just wonder, if you look at the coalition era we're in, the sort of scope for patronage, etc., I mean, maybe it's just too big in some ways, Sikanati. I mean, that might seem a strange thing to say, but the opportunity for badness, for wrongdoing, is so vast.
There is indeed a very big opportunity for things that should not be done to actually be done and are being done and have always been done by the people appointed, let's repeat again, by the finance minister. And I'm not questioning the integrity of the current finance minister, but all finance ministers have been appointing the board of the Public Investment Corporation, concentrating so much vast power that they have 3 trillion rands in control of assets, which need to be vested in the hands of professionals. Those are the people that manage assets as professionals, not people who then have to go to politicians at every occasion, where they, of course, obviously always get asked for particular favors, and you know what that does when politicians are involved and have any power. You have seen the disasters that, for example, in Daybreak, the chicken farm, the chicken company that you have just mentioned now, that was acquired by the PIC in 2015, and in 10 years it was totally destroyed by the management that was appointed by the Public Investment Corporation again. You need to avoid those disasters. Need I mention the VBS Mutual Bank, which again was destroyed through that the appointment by a board that was partly the PIC was responsible for that. Of course, it sent senior members as directors there. So there are many disasters that could be avoided by normalizing the governance of the Public Investment Corporation. In companies where you and I, our pensions are invested, the boards of those companies regulate themselves, and shareholders are always hovering around. For example, in the Public Investment Corporation currently, the finance minister, any finance minister or the finance minister in office at the time, just wakes up after year 3 of the board and replaces everybody, and they appoint whoever they choose. Of course, they will place those superficial advertisements which have no serious requirements whatsoever, and therefore professionals, asset management and life insurance professionals really stay away from applying for those, but then becomes the victim of the people who normally are unemployed and unemployable, who are really in good terms with the people currently in office in government. That does need to change if you need to safeguard those investments held by the Public Investment Corporation. Of course, should that change, we also need to get to a point where the PIC ceases to be a defined benefit contribution, where people are guaranteed what they will get as they put in. You and I, our pensions are managed through the open market, and we depend on the outcomes of market performance of the time, whereas civil servants, the taxpayers, are underwriters of that fund. That does need to change in order to bring about modernization, professionalism on the board, and certainly to take away power from the politicians, who we know what politicians do when they come in contact with money or the possibility of managing other people's money.
Yeah, sure. I mean, a big part of it, isn't it, is the unlisted investment portfolio, because the listed investment portfolio we can kind of see. But is that where we need to have a lot more scrutiny? I mean, that's the daybreak story, really.
Stephen, all of those, and I must say the unlisted portfolio is only about 170 billion rand to 190 billion rand out of 3 trillion rands in assets. The fact that you know or you can see where the assets were invested in terms of the listed companies and in terms of bonds and government debt doesn't change the fact that the people that were appointed to manage the funds are themselves accountable to very questionable people, to questionable politicians. It becomes worse then when it comes to the unlisted funds, because you really have no clue where the money goes. I don't know how big the mandate of the management team is in order to sign off on individual investments. But whatever the size is, in normal companies, boards will go. The executive management team will go to the board for final approval on a big investment. That's regulated by the takeover regulation panel. It's regulated by the Companies Act. It's regulated by other market forces. When it comes to the PIC, you don't really see that kind of rigorous regulation, which again has direct impacts on the performance of the fund and the performance of the fortunes of the beneficiaries of that fund. It does need to change and has been needing to change, particularly in the state capture era, the last 15 years, definitely.
Sekonati Manshantsha, thanks so much. Journalist with News 24 Investigations.
Travel isn't just about destinations. It's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabotja, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place, whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The Money Show.
Business Books.
Well, astonishingly, over the weekend, Elon Musk claiming he would be starting his own political party. He says both the Republicans and the Democrats are failing Americans. But the real reason, I suppose, presumably, is this break with Donald Trump, the president, over the big, beautiful bill that was passed last week. Well, it's either just luck or sheer production excellence that tonight your business book is Hubris Maximus. It's the shattering of Elon Musk by Faiz Siddiqui, a journalist at the Washington Post, joining us now. Faiz, good day to you. Really do appreciate the time. Congratulations on the book. Someone like Elon Musk, fascinating, complicated, mercurial might be a word that people use, the subject of several biographies. You focused primarily on some of his disputes, his fights, his arguments with regulators. Why did you focus on that? What did you think was so interesting about that? What does it tell us?
Hey, so first of all, thank you for having me. I think, we've seen the proof kind of play out regarding his dispute with the president of the United States. We've seen sort of the proof of the idea, I suppose. I think the book gives readers a preview of the way that these spats played out with regulators, as you mentioned, or safety investigators, or officials at every possible level of government or official life. Musk would engage in what seemed like at times petty disputes or disputes that were not necessarily helpful to his businesses, but they were to advance what he believed was right. And we've seen this dynamic now play out with a person who some might argue is the most powerful in the world. That attitude of Musk's extends even to the presidency of the United States.
You detail in one account there was an investigation into one of his cars that was involved in an accident. And it really mattered because it was about the sort of quote unquote auto-driving feature of a Tesla, right? And he's speaking to, I think it's you call it the National Traffic Safety Board in the US. He's actually being interviewed formally over the phone by an investigator, and halfway through he gets so annoyed that he just put the phone down. I mean, that's an astonishing sort of insight into his character.
Right. I mean, and companies, who have been under the microscope and, this type of scrutiny from the National Transportation Safety Board have obviously, reacted, not reacted positively, right, to those types of investigations. But the seeming breach of the established protocols to conduct this kind of investigation, and the lack of recognition of the goal, which, for the NTSB at that point seemed to be gathering information in the interest of advancing safety at any cost, even if it has to be an uncomfortable conversation. That lack of recognition from Musk was evident early on. He just does not want to play that game if it's going to result in discomfort, unexpected or unwanted scrutiny, or potentially get in the way of his broader ambitions.
There's been acres of what we used to say newsprint, but by which I mean discussion here and commentary about whether part of Elon Musk's character and the way he's behaved in the US is because of his upbringing here, and whether it's a sign of maybe, I don't know, the sort of time in which he was growing up, a sign of disrespect of authority, or maybe just feeling that he's better than everyone else. That didn't seem to be a big feature of your book necessarily, but I mean, do you think that's, do you think Americans see it like that, that he's like that because he's from here?
I think I have encountered that attitude. Obviously, as you mentioned, it's not a feature, of discussion in the book. But I do think it occurs to people that, maybe the specific conditions of Musk's upbringing and some of what I do go into, the bullying he faced as a child, or, his family life, this idea of competition, of, a zero-sum game, these things factoring into his business and, managerial style. It's not like a, completely foreign idea. Do Americans view it that way? I think certainly this question came up at a time when the Trump administration was looking to take in immigrants from South Africa, as you know well.
The issues around Twitter, around X, and I mean, I'm someone who years ago used to love X and now haven't tweeted for over a year just because he seems to have destroyed it. Now, maybe it was heading that way anyway. But at one point, you say he sent an email to employees that they had to commit to, quite enjoyed this phrase, hardcore Twitter. An astonishing thing to say, but the writing was on the wall. He was going to turn X into what it is.
Yeah, I mean, and this is another area where there seems to be a principle at play. It's this free speech absolutism, free speech maximalism, let's welcome back individuals or accounts whose suspension Musk objected to. But then as the book lays out, there were times when there seemed to be arbitrary decision-making that worked in Musk's favor, where, there were accounts that were, not necessarily Musk's favorite, who were subjected to discipline or were not, accepted on the platform. If you look at journalists in particular, if you look at an account that was tracking the location of Musk's private jet and the treatment of that account. So for all of the discussion that Twitter then became this cesspool and it was in the interest of free speech, there were now questions about whether Musk was actually abiding by the tenet that he laid out, which was free speech absolutism.
There's a quote that there's a graveyard of his enemies. It's a quote described to him, actually. There is a long list of people who've gone up against him, and most of them have kind of been flattened. How's he been able to run over so many people so strongly? I mean, obviously he is clever. I mean, let's just accept that. But there must be something more to it. There's a force of personality.
I think that is an area where the comparisons to President Trump seem strongest, right? These are individuals who repeatedly have not faced the same consequences as, comparable individuals in their positions would, right? And so how has Musk been able to, I suppose, get away with it all? he has this platform, and he now there's a platform that he now owns, which allows him tremendous influence. He is also the richest person in the world, and for a time he was a close ally and key advisor to the U.S. president. So it's just an illustration of the power and the concentrated power that he has commanded.
I was a little bit surprised that look, like everybody, we kind of expected a bust up between Musk and Trump. But on all things, the issue of US government debt, it's not sexy, it's not interesting, it's very important. Musk may actually be on the right side of the argument. Do you think this was a relationship that they were just looking for the right rock to break it on?
Not necessarily, and I take the point, but not necessarily, because if you look at Musk's history, when he has a goal in mind, and, there can be arguments on whether that is the right goal, whether that is the righteous thing to do, whether it's, morally the correct principle. But when he has a goal in mind, it is difficult to deter him from that specific goal. And that's a personality trait that I like to think is, laid out repeatedly within the book, that, if he is focused on one aspect of the company or one of the areas of technology that he's overseeing, he cannot be deterred from that easily. And, cutting federal spending and reducing the national debt was one of the tenets he laid out. Of course, people wonder, why is he so focused on that? He's hinted at, it's in service of this other goal to, get humanity to Mars. So if he sees it as genuinely obstructing the goal, it stands to reason that, all right, he is now going to, mount a fight against it.
He's not going to change course, is he? He's not going to change behavior. It's worked for him. That's how he'll see it. He's clever and better than everyone else. And this is how he is.
I was frankly a bit surprised that he dialed back his attacks on Trump. And, he even said, he regretted that some of it seemed to have gone too far. That felt like recognition that, maybe this was not a fight that would serve his best interests. But yeah, no, in general, he is not someone to back down.
Thank you very much indeed, Faiz Siddiqui. Really appreciate the time. The book is Hubris Maximus, The Shattering of Elon Musk. Some of his disputes make for fascinating reading. Just gone 7:30.
Travel isn't just about destinations. It's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabotja, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The Money Show. How I make my money.
Well, you may, of course, know there are lots of different routes to end up in certain different fields, but not many people do a degree in art history and end up running an auction house. One of them is Susie Goodman, now the executive director of Strauss & Co. Susie, good evening, and thanks so much for agreeing to spend some time with us on The Money Show tonight.
Oh, pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You started by studying a history of art degree at UCT. Art, and let me just get this out the way. Art had no fascination for me when I was at school. Clearly, it was very different for you.
Yes, and luckily, I also have a few genes in my family. Both my mother studied art in Johannesburg, and my dad was a wildlife photographer. So I suppose the apple didn't fall very far from the tree, but they certainly weren't involved in auctions.
Okay. And at the time when you started studying history of art, did you think this is what I was going to do? Because there aren't many ways to make money with that degree.
You're absolutely right. No, I actually also did take geography just as a sideline because I thought maybe I better branch out a bit. But I was very lucky. I realized that actually there are many different facets to the art world, and auctioneering is actually something that lots of people don't talk about or don't know about, and particularly in this part of the world. The secondary market is a small market. So I was lucky. I did a postgraduate degree that taught me about the magic of the auction world and how you can sell anything. And I did think that I'd be a jewelry specialist, which is as much as I love jewelry, I like too many things now. So I think maybe I'm more of a generalist.
Okay, so I mean, the number of times that I've seen an auction, I haven't seen many. I do remember as a child watching someone on the side of a road just auctioning whatever it was that they had, and I found it fascinating. There's clearly something that you find, I don't know if it's a vibe, a feeling, but something mesmerizing about a good auction.
There certainly is. And actually, just as a sideline story, I was asked by CITO, as you know, which is a training institute in this country, to help be involved in training auctioneers. And I had to say that I experienced the wide variety of auctioneers. So you have cattle auctioneers, car auctioneers, property auctioneers, art auctioneers. And I sometimes think that's quite fun because we talk very differently. So there was a wonderful Zimbabwean auctioneer who sells tobacco, and he started before me, and he was going like that, and I was like, oh my goodness. And I had to come after him and go 2,000, 2,200, 2,500. So it was quite amusing. But the thing that grabs me about an auction is that it's the culmination of an amazing journey of finding artworks to sell on behalf of the seller, and obviously presenting them to the future buyer, and then working with the buyer and putting and placing them in a collection. But the bit about auctions that really, really grabbed me is that you don't really know what's going to happen on the night, because yes, you've got a value, yes, you've got a reserve, yes, you've got people interested. But if you have all of the ingredients and you've got 2 or 3 people who land up fighting for it, you can the numbers get bigger and the excitement gets bigger and the adrenaline drives faster. And I think that's the bit I just love, that magic, is that the ultimate price is defined when the hammer falls. So I like that drama. I love the fact that you don't know who's going to be on the phone or who's going to be in the room. So for me, it's an amazing privilege to be able to sell art this way.
I mean, it's interesting that actually quite a few movies that, now that I think about it, have scenes involving auctions because of that inherent drama. It's actually, I imagine, being part of it is far better than watching anyone trying to create a fictional account of it.
It absolutely is, and I'm sure you realize that a few weeks ago we sold a painting for 31 million rand, and I promise you could have heard not only a pin drop, but you could hear everyone inhaling as the price grew and exhaling as the next person bid, and you can't make it up. It's the most extraordinary sensation, but also it's full of, it's like a performance, but it's not really a performance because it's real life. So I think that's the bit that it does capture you. It is evocative, so you're right. There are lots of movies that have very good-looking people taking auctions, and there tends to be sort of a Thomas Crown affair moment when something gets pinched off the wall. But luckily for us, that doesn't happen too often. So it does create the sort of magic of, I suppose, prestige and celebrities and numbers. But I often remind people that we auction things with just as much passion for 1,000 rand as we do for maybe R1 million. R1 million gets a bit scary, but we do sell all varieties of pricing by auction.
And I mean, is there as much excitement when something that's relatively low cost is suddenly increasing in value as opposed to something you expect to go for a lot? I mean, in a way, something you expect to go for 1,000 rand going for 2,000 is a lot more exciting than something you expect to go for R1 million going for 1.2.
Absolutely. And actually the bit that, Stephen, that sometimes is the really humbling bit is that because we deal with the people who's selling, often we know the story about why someone's selling. And so you can see the person who's brought the work in for evaluation day, and perhaps they're very desperate for some money, or they're trying to pay their university fees, or they're trying to put a deposit down on a house, and they've got this sort of the whole lot of works of art that they're hoping they can realize a little bit of money towards those dreams. And then those works start climbing. And the sheer amazement when somebody thinks they're getting 1,000 rand and they get 2,500 rand, or they're thinking something, which we valued at 5,000 rand, suddenly people are fighting over it and we sell it for 25,000 rand. Those moments are so incredible and are so joyful. There is also the sad side when someone is desperately needing it and then something doesn't sell, and that's hard because that also is the reality of our business. Not everything finds a home, as much as we try to find homes, but it's that sort of emotion of you're not quite sure. We say it's this value and then it goes for the right amount or it goes above it, and that moment is also quite exciting.
Are there certain things that you find this happens to, this sort of level of excitement, than others? And I'm presuming in my own head, I'm thinking that this must happen to works of art where you get a much higher price, a much more exciting auction than almost anything else. I mean, yes, maybe they're fancy cars or Elon Musk's mug or something, but I'm presuming it's art where you're more likely to have that happen.
I think you're right, because there is, as a lot of people know, art is not it's not bread or milk or your necessities. It's an amazing privilege to have a piece of art, own it. It gives you joy. It gives a different satisfaction to an essential necessity. So I think there's, which comes with auctions, is that amazing feeling of, I love it, I've fallen in love with it, I like it, I want to collect it, I need to own it, I would love to have it on my wall. So there's emotion in it that sometimes is a little bit less, is very different to maybe somebody who's trying to buy a car at a second-hand auction, because that's probably just a pure transactional fact. But the bit that is special about those moments in the auction world, you have stories, and an artwork keeps that story with it. Because if somebody, for example, bought it from the artist and has owned it in their collection for a while, and they knew the artist and they follow on and say they made it for a wedding or they made it for a birthday, those stories keep going with the picture as much as we can hopefully retell it. Or there's a wonderful story about who owned something, or it was in the collection, as you know, you mentioned somebody like David Bowie. All of those things have stories, that I bought something from a David Bowie's collection. What it encourages evocative, competitive bidding, because you want a slice of it. And that you don't get when you're doing second-hand cars, for sure.
There is some artwork which is incredibly controversial. I can think of one example. I spent as an EWN reporter a couple of days outside a gallery which bears the same name that you do.
Yes.
Very controversial artwork. Yes. And that, I mean, that it must have come as a surprise to all involved then. I think it did. But there must be times when you look at a piece of work and you think, sure, there's a controversial story, or it's a controversial piece, or the person who created it, or maybe a previous owner, is now controversial. And actually, I don't know if I want to touch this.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, and I think that comes with the story of things. And I think the one thing that I've learned about the art world is that there's something for everybody, and there's different tastes for different people, and there are different genres for different subjects. If something has had for example, an artwork that's been damaged, or an artwork that has been, if you take actually, which you reported on, if you take that artwork that we handled, the Stolen Peony, in a sense, not that we could auction it because it belongs to the state, but the story behind that is so intriguing. I mean, it is, if it ever came up to auction, it would increase in value. I mean, they say in the auction world, there are aspects that you always put into value, which is the collection it comes from, how good a piece, what condition it's in, what period it was painted, the wow factor. That work would have a wow factor, and it would cause a stir of excitement because it has such an intriguing story with it. You're right, not every story you want, not every story you can, you necessarily maybe want to pass on in that sense, but you also have to realize that the artwork is still a wonderful artwork, whether you like it or not. It might not be your taste, but it might appeal to somebody else. They tend to, I think that's what's quite nice about art, it tends to find the homes it needs to go to. But I do find the stories intriguing. I mean, when you meet somebody who inherited something or got it from the artist, or, I mean, the other day, because we sold a Fridjhon, there was another client who had a Fridjhon they sold, and they bought it directly from the artist. And her husband died, so she phoned up Fridjhon and said, should I sell it? And he said, absolutely not. You must wait until I'm really, really dead. And, those kind of stories are quite fun, but they make it sort of, I don't know, it's quite nice. If you had it on your wall, you could retell it. So that's a bit, maybe I like the auction world too, because it's about people. Somebody made the art, somebody's going to own it, somebody will own it. So I guess it's the cycle of life, really.
It's an astonishing comment by Fridjhon to say that, but I mean, I'm afraid to say probably correct.
Yes, it is.
When you started, you actually went overseas and you went to Christie's, and they're renowned auctioneers in the UK. Were there many, I mean, I can't think of other places really in South Africa that you could have learnt art auctioneering. I mean, there aren't many options to sort of get into that business.
No, it's a much smaller pool here. I was very lucky to go and work at Christie's, and I was very lucky to try. You have to go through an auctioneering course. I was a little bit cheeky because we went on the course and we were bidding and we were learning how to breathe and to do the increments. And at Christie's, they run the auction book, so where the auctioneer has the estimates and the reserves and the bids. They run it in code, so they use, in case somebody stole the auctioneer's book, they wouldn't be able to read the increments of people's bids that have been left. So they use a sort of code, which is you have to learn. And then you have to do a practice, and there are all of these auctioneers looking at you. And when I started auctioneering, there were only 4 women globally that were auctioneers. So it was quite fun to break some of those barriers. But I was a little bit cheeky because the auctioneer who was sort of running that day said to me, "I don't quite understand what you're saying." So I said, "Oh, which bid?" He said, "Are you saying the bid is on the left, or are you saying the bid is in the lift?" And so I thought, oh my goodness. So I said, "No, I think maybe it's my accent." So he said, oh, yes, perhaps. And I said, "No, aren't we an international company? Wouldn't it be good to have a South African accent?" So I was a bit cheeky, but luckily I was able to do it. And it was the first auction I took. I remember standing in the rostrum. South Kensington was a sort of part of the Christie's, but we had King Street and South Kensington. And South Kensington had this wonderful atmosphere of selling house sale contents and silver and furniture. So there was quite a lot of lots, and they let me cut my teeth on a silver sale. And I remember standing up and going, "Oh my goodness, this is real money." Because until you get to that moment, which is the culmination between the buyer and the seller, it sort of is numbers. But suddenly the reality of like, oh, this is really a lot of money. But it was only £50. But still, I think the nerves and what I was doing was like, oh. But the fun part about it is that you get your style, you get your flow. I talk fast, as you know, and so I often got the sales that had a lot of lots. So you had to get through 300 lots, and they would say, "Susie, you do it because you can talk quickly." But when we were training, and I'm sure other auctioneers maybe have experienced this too, one of the people who were training, I said, sometimes in the middle of an auction, because you can be up there for 2 or 3 hours. They said, sometimes your mind just wanders and you can find yourself thinking, "Oh my goodness, what's for dinner?" And I remember thinking that's impossible because there's too many things between the increments and the clients and the telephone bids and the code. And then I suddenly, one auction was standing there going, "Oh, should we have chicken, or maybe we should have beef?" Sure. So you do find your mind is working fast, but it can wander. But the tempo is important. So as I mentioned earlier, cattle auctioneers have a different tempo. We do too. When you're selling something like wine, you definitely go faster than when you're selling, a big Kentridge or an Irma Stern in the millions. You have to sense the room, and you have to use the style of bidding and increments that suit what you're selling.
There's so much to it. All right, we're speaking to Susie Goodman, the Executive Director of Strauss & Co. She is an art auctioneer. How she makes her money on The Money Show tonight.
Travel isn't just about destinations. It's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabotja, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024.
The Money Show, how I make my money.
Susie Goodman is the Executive Director of Strauss & Co. She's the art auctioneer. We're speaking to her this evening. Susie, when you started, I'm presuming that auctions were really in person or on the phone. I'm presuming they're done in lots of different ways now.
Sure, that's a very good question. Yes, since COVID, they've completely transformed. Before COVID, we used to have a room of 300 or 400 people watching an auction. Post-COVID, we're grateful when there are 50 people in the room and we've got 600 people watching us online. And obviously then we've got a bank of telephones and people's bids in our book. So I did find myself in the middle of COVID looking at a sort of computer and a camera and thinking, my goodness, there are people watching us, but we've got no connection. And you sort of imagine then, what are people doing? Are they working or making tea or eating supper? One client told us that when we had a live auction, we sort of became their sort of evening entertainment because you could see us, but we couldn't see them. So, yes, the personal side, that's a bit I miss because when somebody's bidding in the room, there is definitely a rapport. You can see if someone, could possibly bid again or they've had enough. And it has its, I guess you have to adapt. But then we're also very grateful because so many more people are bidding. So many more people are accessing artworks and the art community and the art market on the southern part of the continent because of the digitalization. So I think it's got a very big, shiny silver lining, even though we might miss the nuances of being able to use someone in the room. And you often can, there's those great stories like you mentioned in the movies where somebody comes into an auction room and is sort of waving at their friend to see their seat, and you as the auctioneer can make a little bit of a joke at it and say, are you bidding? And then, 200,000 for you, and they suddenly go, oh, no, I was just waving. So those wonderful moments that add to the atmosphere are a little bit different when you're looking at, TV and 600 people watching you.
I can imagine. I mean, I presume then that the more people who are in the room, whether virtually or actually in the room, the more people bidding, the greater the chance that you're going to get higher than you expected. I mean, the more people are involved, the more money for the seller, right?
Yes, and obviously there's some lots that attract a lot of bidding, particularly, and that's when you get some of those fantastic prices. And some lots attract one person. But when you've got a good sale that's been well marketed and we've reached good buyers, then it should make for a better sell-through rate, and many more of the lots in the art sales sell. So I think, yes, you do. You do want to have lots of people online. Even if they're just watching, they're maybe understanding the process so that they can bid or sell. And I think that's, there's also an intrigue, like, oh my goodness, I'd love to see what that work, I saw it, I viewed it, but I'd love to see what it actually fetched at the end of the day. You mentioned something about training, and I think that's one thing that I think was really important about being in London, because it's such a big market. The nuances of the rules and regulations around auctions and art auctions in particular is incredibly important, because when I was at Christie's, there was the big antitrust case between Sotheby's and Christie's when they colluded over commission. And of course, it all went to court, and as you know, what happened. But for us, it was an amazing place to learn properly the rules and the transparency and how you do it and how the increments work. So, because I think there's also an understanding. Sometimes people think, I don't quite understand it. Is what I'm getting the right thing? And because we've learned and we work with international rules, we very much coherently make sure that we are applying, the right. We're not bidding off the chandelier. Sometimes people can accuse us of, because it's a misunderstanding. And I think that was one of the biggest privileges of being in a big pond, is those rules and regulations were very, very defined.
The future of auctioneering. I have a horrible vision of a sort of AI bot trying to conduct an online auction. And on one level, you could do that in text quite easily. I can't imagine that it would be any fun. For some people, that wouldn't necessarily matter. But do you worry that the role of an auctioneer could be diminished over time?
I think there's always going to be, when you look at a pure online sale, there's always a place for that, because you're able to sell things over a while without having somebody in the rostrum talking for days. But I don't think you could replace an auctioneer in a high value sale or a sale that has important works, because sometimes things go wrong. Sometimes somebody bids on the wrong lot, and then you have to reverse it and you have to undo it and say, no, let's start again. Those nuances of the sort of flying plates in a Greek kitchen scenario, those things you wouldn't be able to use a bot to manage it. It would be too many. You'd have to train it for a long time to learn some of the scenarios that auctioneers have to use on their feet or adapt in a situation. But I think it would take out too much of I don't think you'd get the drama and the excitement and the nuances and the character. I think a bot would be very clinical and I hope not, because it wouldn't be nearly as fun having a challenge of. I don't think they'd get the timing. They definitely wouldn't get the problem-solving aspect, because those things you do have to think on your feet. If somebody, suddenly someone wants to split an increment, how is the bot going to know? Well, I suppose you could train it, but it wouldn't be nearly as fun to be able to sell everything by an AI-generated bot.
So much about AI is, yes, it could be done, but what would be the point? And I think this is a good example of that. Susie, thank you. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and it's always wonderful to speak to someone who enjoys what they do.
I certainly do. I'm very lucky. Thank you, though, for having me.
Thank you. Susie Goodman, the Executive Director of Strauss & Co., how she makes her money on The Money Show.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Bank, proud sponsor of the African Blockchain Report 2024.
Well, Wall Street down tonight. The US President Donald Trump saying he would impose 25% tariffs on goods from Japan and South Korea starting at the end of the month, starting on the 1st of August to be precise. And that's pushing the Dow Jones down 1%, the Nasdaq down 0.86, the Nasdaq down 0.88, and the S&P 500 down 0.86. You can imagine, of course, the impact that is going to have. We'll find out a little bit more about it all tomorrow, which is when we will rejoin you. Thanks for being with us tonight. You with The Money Show. It's 8 o'clock.